Hey y'all, it's Heel Heat time.
Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles and this is going to be something new for my show. We're going to do a concept. It's not a new concept, but it's new to the show. We're calling this How I Would Have Booked. Basically, we're going to go back through the annals of history, see something that I feel was booked totally wrong, and how I would have done it if I was the person in charge. Right out the gates, we're going to go back to probably one of the biggest stories in history of wrestling, Bret Hart joining WCW coming off the Montreal Screwjob. So this is how I would have booked Bret Hart in WCW. Now, there's a lot of moving parts here. I know the contract situations, these guys would have to agree with my ideas, so in reality, some of it might have changed. But this is my optimal opinion, what could have happened and what should have happened. We'll start off with a little bit of backstory. Bret Hart, long of the WWE, WWF at the time, was already a legend, a multiple-time champion, multiple-time tag champion. Came to the point where Vince McMahon could no longer honor his contract, so he told Bret, if WCW is still offering you a contract, go ahead and sign it. I'll let you out of our contract. Bret does so. We lead up to everything leading up to Survivor Series, which we're not going to go through. It's been talked about ad nauseum. You can find 8 million videos on it. This is just a quick recap. Bret and Shawn, the whole thing with the Montreal Screwjob. Bret not wanting to lose the belt to Shawn. Vince calling the audible. Leads us to Bret actually going to WCW. Now, depending on whose report you believe, he was available to show up as early as the next night on Nitro, all the way up to 6 weeks later, which I believe is when he actually did show up. So, for the sake of just being on the careful side, we're going to go with the 6-week version that he was not able to do. He had a 6-week no complete. Although I do believe that Vince would have broken their contract by not honoring the creative clause. So they might have been able to get him the next night. It might have been years and years of legal mumbo-jumbo that they had to deal with. So let's just say they had to wait the 6 weeks. Now, how they brought them in, first I would have had him do a promo talking about what happened and how he's in WCW now, where he feels he could get a fair share. He sees some of the same things in WCW, and he's here to help clean it up, here to make WCW great, here because Vince drove him away, drove him to the competition, and he wants it to be the wrestling that he grew up on, the wrestling that he helped make as popular as it is now. We see that. Pretty much we're going to go with the same build where he's the referee in the Zbyszko and Bischoff match at Starrcade. And if you don't know some of this, go back and check out. Some of this is going to coincide with what happened historically and some not so much. The reason we're going to keep this, we'll get to in a little bit later. We keep him as the ref for Starrcade between Bischoff and Zbyszko. That match pretty much goes off as it should. We have the main event, Sting versus Hulk Hogan for the WCW Championship. This where it goes a little different. I would book this how it should have been booked, and they kind of did. Nick Patrick should have actually did a fast count, not the count he did, or should have been something screwy, where Nick Patrick was basically screwing Sting out of the championship. Yeah, Bret come down just like he did on the real show and restart the match. Sting wins. Big happiness. Everybody's excited. The only difference I would have made between this and what really happened is the whole deal with Nick Patrick and seemingly Hulk Hogan allegedly getting together and conspiracies say that he didn't actually want to lose to Sting, so he had Nick Patrick do a condition or a traditional count. To me, once you had that regular 3 count, it destroyed the angle. So either a fast count or a screwy finish, something of that nature. Much like we would have seen coming out of the screw job, that's the reason Bret would have came down. There would have been precedent for Bret coming in because he was licensed for a referee for the show. We see them win. Sting and Bret are holding up hands, which brings us to the Monday Nitro the day after. Day after Nitro, we see Hall, Nash, Hogan, the NWO in the ring. Hall and Nash say to Hogan, you didn't hold the ball up, you didn't keep your part of the bargain. Boom. They kick him out of the NWO. NWO starts to crack. Some members decide to leave with Hogan. A couple guys stay, noticeably guys like Conan and Curt Hennig. A couple guys stay with the NWO. However, it's not as strong as it was going into Starrcade. Hogan's gone. They beat him up, write him off TV for a few months. He's out of the picture. Now you got basically the outsiders who are saying they're going to come for Sting and Bret Hart, who are the reasons that the NWO is broken up. Which leads us into Sold Out, the next pay-per-view. The build for this will be Sting and Bret versus the Outsiders as a main event. I think it'd be a good idea to keep Sting strong, keep Bret aligned with the top story in the company. The faces pick up the win, which only gives to more dissension in the ranks of the NWO. More members decide to leave. It fractures basically down to the point where it's just Hall and Nash. So, essentially, within a month and a half, the NWO goes from the strongest force in WCW to totally crumbled, and the guys go in their separate way. And I would leave it that way. I would leave the NWO split at least for a long while. They go their separate ways, go into different areas. All the while, we have other people being built up, and some of the guys from the NWO as well. Leads us to our next pay-per-view, which we have DDP, who had recently won the U.S. title off of Curt Hennig. DDP has an open challenge. Bret Hart opens a challenge, answers the challenge on a Monday Nitro, says, hey, you have this open challenge. I came here for a few things. I want legitimate competition. I want to wrestle the best. I want to wrestle you at Super Brawl 8. So Super Brawl 8 comes. We get DDP versus Bret Hart for the U.S. title. Bret wins the championship off of DDP at a really solid match. Wins it with the sharpshooter. We see Bret go over, but DDP still looks strong. Again, at the end, we see the faces hug, shake hands. We're getting a little bit of a different vibe from what we had in WCW. More clean finishes, more sportsmanship being brought in, kind of sweeping back in a different direction to fight what WWE's doing when they're going full-blown Attitude Era at this point. All the while this is going on, I have the younger card guys and some of the guys that weren't pushed, like Chris Benoit, Eddie Guerrero, Raven, Chris Jericho, along with the guys like DDP and Goldberg that were getting pushed, have them start kind of building up to where they're getting into the main event territories where they can wrestle against the guys like the Outsiders or the Giant or Savage or Hart or Sting. Basically building up your next generation of main eventers at the same time. While we're doing this, we have Curt Hennig, one of the guys left over from the NWO. He becomes the next challenger for the U.S. title, either saying, hey, look, I never got my match. I never got my rematch with DDP. I want it now. So we lead up to Hennig versus Hart at Spring Stampede. The storyline strongly relies on their history in the WWF. Also brings in the fact that Hennig is still a little bit upset that the NWO was broken up because now he He hitched his horse to the NWO. Now he's around with no allies. Everybody hates him, and he blames Bret Hart. We get Hart picking up the win in another solid technical match. Very little interference in all these matches. Again, we're going with a different product than what was being offered. Hart picks up the win. That feud goes by the wayside. Hennig goes on to wrestle with other guys. Helps build up the mid-card guys that I was just mentioning, which is something you should have been doing anyway. This leads us in to the next month's pay-per-view, Slamboree, where Hennig, who has been building the guys on a TV, we have a number one contenders match on Thunder, Eddie Guerrero versus Curt Hennig, number one contender for the U.S. title, that is. It ends in a double disqualification when both the guys are outside of the ring pounding the crap out of each other. There's a question as to who's going to be the number one contender. J.J. Dillon comes out later in the show. Bret Hart comes out. Mean Gene comes out. Mean Gene's asking J.J. what his verdict is. And J.J. saying, I don't know what to do. This is unprecedented. We needed to have a winner. We're only a week away from the pay-per-view. Bret walks out and he says, you know what, JJ? I'm all about giving everybody a fair share. Why not give both of them a chance? So we set up a three-way dance at Slamboree. Eddie Guerrero versus Curt Hennig versus Bret Hart. In the match, I make Eddie Guerrero the star of the show. I make him do the lion's share of the work, make it look like he's the guy that's going to win. At some point, we get Rick Rude screws Eddie. So Eddie's pulled out of the match. Bret doesn't see it. However, Eddie hits the frog splash. Rick Rude screws Eddie. Bret doesn't see it. Sees that Hennig is laying down. Goes over, puts on the sharpshooter. Tap, tap, tap. Bret holds the U.S. title. Splits off Hennig to go and wrestle with Eddie Guerrero on a program. A little bit of what he was doing leading up to this anyway. Putting over the mid-card guys, building Eddie Guerrero to where he can be a future challenger for this title. Which brings us to the Bash at the Beach. Traditionally, one of WCW's bigger shows. What I was just mentioning and what I've been mentioning throughout is the mid-card guys building up. Part of this was Chris Benoit having several big-name wins over guys like Randy Savage, Curt Hennig, even maybe Hall or Nash or both of them, the Giant, leading up to this pay-per-view, where we see Benoit is the next contender, and Benoit's the next contender for Hart's U.S. title. We go to the show. We're told in the beginning we have a 30-minute time limit. Benoit and Hart wrestle to a stalemate. The crippler crossface is locked in. You hear the bell ring, but you didn't see Bret tap. So everybody wonders, is this going to be another screw job? Nope. Time limit draw. We get the two guys, probably the two best in-ring workers at the time, wrestle to a draw. Leave us wanting more. Leave us to build this feud going forward. Which leads us to the rematch at Road Wild. We get a Road Wild match, which traditionally wasn't the great WCW pay-per-view draw. We put this match on here to help bring some buy rates to it. And yeah, it might not be the crowd for this, but we're trying to make that crowd for this. We're doing this more for the home viewer buy rate than the Sturgis crowd. We do Benoit versus Bret Hart, no time limit. Benoit picks up the win in a surprising fashion after a grueling match about, I would say, leave it under the 30-minute mark, keep it around 15, 20 minutes. Still have it be just as grueling as the first match. Have Benoit wrestle at a faster pace, have Bret Hart wrestle at a faster pace. Kind of building the urgency that wasn't there in the first match. Benoit picks up the win in a roll-up situation, kind of a surprise out of nowhere, thus keeping Bret looking strong, but building Benoit to someone that could beat a guy of Bret Hart's stature. Which leads us into the next match, which would be at Fall Brawl, the War Games. Now we have the War Games going on, all that other stuff, which Sting's is still involved. Sting's still the champion. He hasn't lost it yet. Sting's involved in the War Games with his team versus Raven's Flock, which is as I said, we're building up the mid-carders. Raven has been the challenger for the WCW title all through the year, all through basically since about Slamboree till now. So the end game is Sting would continually be getting screwed by Raven's Flock, put them all in the War Games. This leaves Bret and Benoit for their third and final match, a 2 out of 3 falls match, no time limit. Benoit picks up the win, 2 falls to 1. We see at the end, Bret and Benoit hug. Bret raises his hand, talks about this is the future of wrestling. That Chris Benoit is a guy, we see promos the next night on Nitro where he gives a ring endorsement to Chris Benoit. He's a guy that my father trained. He's the future of wrestling. He's the future of WCW going forward. And yes, if you're wondering why I'm putting Benoit over so big, you got to adjust for time, okay? We know what we know about Benoit now, and that happened 10 years ago. At this time, this was 10 years before it happened. So we got to use the tools that we have at the time, and we got to adjust to what we would have done knowing what we did then. So that's, I can feel you now sending the flames my way of why are you pushing Chris Benoit so large? He deserved it at the time. Anyway, Bret puts him over, says he doesn't know where he's going to go now, which brings out Macho Man Savage on Nitro. Savage comes out and says, you're talking about your past your time. A guy told me once that I was past my time, talking about Vince. They told me I had to put over you young guys, being you and the new generation guys. He said, I'm not past my prime. I've never passed my prime. I want to see it one more time. Hart versus Savage. Leads into the pay-per-view. Halloween Havoc coming up. Bret Hart versus Randy Macho Man Savage. Another fantastic match. Bret picks up the win. Goes on. Picks up a couple more wins on Nitro and Thunder. And we get to the new, probably my least favorite pay-per-view, but it works good on this because it helps to do the build that I'm talking on. World War III. Bret's in the World War III match. It's going hard. It's going strong. We get down to the final 4 guys, and we got Kevin Nash, the Giant, Bret Hart, and Chris Benoit. And we have these 4 wrestling it out. We see Benoit and Bret kind of talking to each other on the side. We see Nash and Giant kind of talking with each other. So we see semi-alliances form. Bret and Benoit go after the 2 big men. Nash manages to step aside of Bret Hart. Bret goes into the ropes. Nash goes to give him a big boot. We know the classic elimination. He misses the big boot, gets his leg hung up on the ropes. Bret tosses him over. In the meanwhile, Benoit is struggling with the Giant, trying to get the Giant over the ropes. Giant's holding back. Bret comes over, dumps the Giant out, helps Benoit dump out the Giant, leading to Bret and Benoit being the last 2 guys left. Bret and Benoit go back and forth for a little while. Eventually, Bret gets a little bit too aggressive, goes for a clothesline. Bret Hart holds the top rope down. Benoit goes tumbling over. We get your winner, an automatic #1 contender, Bret the Hitman Hart. Keeping it strong, keeping Benoit looking like he deserves to be one of the top guys. Again, making Bret Hart stay in the picture. We're coming up on the 1-year anniversary of his joining WCW. And we're hearing a lot about that, how much he's done in the 1 year, how he's been a U.S. champion, his tag team with Sting. When is he gonna use this number one contendership? He says, well, I respect Sting, and I respect what we've both done in WCW and how we've cleaned up WCW and got rid of the NWO and made it back to where the competition matters and the best wrestler is in the best position. Sting, you've had the world title for a year. It's my turn to challenge. What do you say, Sting? Me versus you at Starrcade. Sting comes out, gladly accepts, the two shake hands. We go to Starrcade 98, main event of the night, Sting versus Bret the Hitman Hart. Get a nice, good, long, decent match, about 15, 17 minutes long. Sting puts Bret in a sharpshooter. Just as we see Bret's about to tap, we see him roll it over, turn it around, and put Sting back into his own move to put Sting in the sharpshooter where Sting had him in the scorpion. I know it's the same move, which is why it's a little bit confused there. Bret rolls Sting over, has Sting now in the sharpshooter, pulls him to the middle of the ring. We see the Sting trying to stretch to the ropes. Bret pulls him back again. We see it happen a second time, a third time. Finally, Sting passes out. Referee calls for the belt. Bret the Hitman Hart wins, leaving him your new WCW champion. Pay-per-view goes off the air. Fireworks are going off. And this is where I'm going to stop it. So what we have here is we took 1 year and built Bret Hart to where he's the main guy, or one of the main guys in WCW, changed the course of what WCW was doing, maybe changed the course of what professional wrestling history was doing. We take him from helping Sting out of a situation where the NWO was dominating to Sting and Bret Hart cleaning up WCW, getting rid of all of the elements that brought it down, to leading to a pure wrestling match between Sting and Bret Hart, with Bret Hart winning, finally getting the hero's welcome, getting exactly what he deserved, all the while during the year building up different guys like Guerrero, Raven, Jericho. They're all getting built up to be the next set of contenders for Bret the Hitman Hart to go through the next year. I think it's a better route than what they took with him. I hope you think so too. This is the first of these concepts, so I don't know how it's going to be received. Let me know what you think. Did you like my ideas? Did you think it was better than what they actually did? Do you have different views that you think might have been better? Let me know in the comments. Also, hit like, share, subscribe if you haven't subscribed already, and keep it going. But basically, that's all I have to say on this one. My name is George Coles, and this is an episode of How I Would Have Booked.